On my way to SHOT Show's day at the range, I noticed thousands and thousands of anti-gun signs lining the median and the curbs. It says that guns are the #1 killer of children and teens in America. And so, honestly, I wanted to see, is it true? And I looked at that, plus 4 other of the most common arguments against guns in the United States. We're never going to convince the anti-gun crowd. But the problem is that gun owners are good people that don't want to do any harm in the world, and they're getting swayed by some of these things. In fact, I went and asked questions around town to get some video clips of gun owners and some of the things that they actually think are probably true about guns. Guns are now the #1 killer of children and teens in the United States, even more than car accidents. What laws do you think we could enact to stop that?
Probably an assault weapons ban, the AR-15.
I am not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
So the liberals' messaging is getting through to gun owners. Let's take a look at that stat to see if it's really true. Now, answer a question for me, right? This is an easy one. Do you think murder and suicide are the exact same thing? Do you think suicide and being killed by somebody because you're committing a crime against them and they're defending themselves against you, do you think those are the same causes of death? Do you think dying from being murdered and dying from an accident are the exact same cause of death? Well, the CDC seems to think so, because look carefully at that stat. They're lumping every cause of death that's related to guns into one, and yet they're breaking apart lots of other things like specific diseases and different types of accidents like drowning, suffocation, etc. So if you lump up one and break apart all the others, and you think that suicide and murder and all those other things are the exact same thing, well then yes, it might actually be true. But any reasonable person looking at that would say, oh, no, guns are not the #1 killer of children and teens in the US. In fact, it's not even very close. And then you look a little bit deeper into that number and you say like, wow, but there are too many killings of teens in the US. Well, here's a stat that's pretty disturbing. According to US News, the homicide rate for black males ages 16 and 17 was 18 times higher than that for white males, and 4.6 times higher than that of the stat for Hispanic males. That's pretty disturbing for a whole lot of reasons. Are there things we need to fix in America to drop the murder rate and drop kids and teens from dying? Yeah, there are. And we need to work on some of those cultural, geographic, poverty-related, many other different things that are leading to bad outcomes. Absolutely, we need to work on it. But is it the guns causing these problems? Apparently not. Number 2, let's go ask some gun owners what they think about red flag laws. Do you support red flag laws?
Yes. I mean, it's a right. Like, so if you're doing things that would prevent you from having that right, then you lose it.
That's a good question.
Do you support red flag laws?
Say that again?
Do you support red flag laws?
I can't.
Do you want me to explain that a little bit?
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to explain. In fact, we talked to a lot of people on the street, and less than 5% of gun owners knew what a red flag law even is. So the way that it would be portrayed by somebody who supports it is that a red flag law allows law enforcement who identifies somebody who is a potential threat and takes away their guns so that they can't enact that threat. You know, the classic situation would be somebody fantasizing about doing a mass terrible thing, whatever, and the government identifies it, sees something bad's gonna happen, goes and takes their guns, and now everybody is safe. Now, if it worked that way and we could find a way to constitutionally do it, I might be in favor of something like that too. And that's why we're seeing in so many states in the United States where it's Republicans, it's gun owners who are voting for things and not realizing the impact of what they're doing. So let's look at California and New York, and let's look at their record, the government's ability to give out permits for concealed carry. Well, as soon as they thought that legally they could keep people from getting a concealed carry permit, what did they do in New York and California? Well, they just didn't issue any. Zero. Nobody gets a permit, period. And they've done that for years until the courts have stopped them. And so if a government has the ability to take away your guns, it's going to. Then we think about other problems, like some constitutional issues that the person hasn't committed a crime yet. And so can we punish somebody for a crime that they have only thought crimes and not actually committed? As we're going around town talking to people today, I'm writing on today's video sponsor. This is super cool. It is the Eohora M1P. So it's an electric moped. It'll has a max speed of 37 miles an hour and it'll go over 45 miles on a charge. The tires are really thick and fully tubeless, so you won't have to worry about flats on a 12-inch wheel, and has a really nice dual suspension front and back to keep things posh as you ride around town. You got key with a remote control for it. Over here, you got your motor, blinkers, lights, hazards, everything so that it can be fully street legal. You have pneumatic brakes right here that work really well. It's a pretty fun way to get around town. Check it out, the Eohora M1P. I have a link at the top of the description. Check out the Eohora M1P at the link in the description. See ya. I also heard as I talked to gun owners, them repeating the same tropes from anti-gunners without realizing quite what they were saying.
Your average citizen, there's really no reason to own one except for recreation. You don't go hunting with an AR-15.
There's no reason to have an AR-15. There's a really good reason to have an AR-15. This comes from political scientist Rudolf Rummel, who has coined the term democide in his research. So in the 20th century, the most recent complete century we had, guess how many people were unarmed and were killed by their own government? That number, 262 million people. Democide is the reason we have the Second Amendment. That's what our forefathers saw after they were attacked by their own government and had to fight a revolution to create a new one. The Second Amendment is how we protect ourselves. Yes, against intruders who may also have powerful guns, but also against our own governments. Here's one that I've heard several times recently, and it's comical, but I've seen it really trip up some gun owners who tried to fight against this argument. Gun owners like to say that, we need to have the same weapons as the government for the reason that I just said. And an anti-gunner will then say, well, that's ridiculous. You think in Waco somebody should be able to have a nuclear silo in their backyard? Obviously, that's a stupid idea. And the gun owner's a little bit, well, you're right. I don't think people should be able to make their own nuclear weapons. They could just wipe out the entire population of the US. That seems like we should maybe not do that. Well, the Second Amendment doesn't actually protect your right to create a nuclear weapon, at least according to Supreme Court law. And that is that it protects our right to bearable arms. You can't bear a nuclear arm. It's too big. I can't walk around to Walmart with that, right? And there are also laws that the term is dangerous or unusual weapons, according to Supreme Court precedent. And so, no, the Second Amendment, according to Supreme Court law, doesn't actually even protect that. So you can definitely support the Second Amendment and definitely not think that people should have nuclear weapons in their backyard. But here's the most common argument against guns in the United States. Basically, it tries to tie crime to gun ownership, and there are a few problems. So the one that I see constantly right now is they say, look, there was a huge surge of gun sales in the United States during the pandemic, and the murder rate went way up. So one must have caused the other. Well, one gun owner that I asked in town saw right through that one. During the pandemic, there was a huge surge in gun sales, and immediately thereafter, there was a huge surge in murders with guns. But gun people usually say that it's not the guns that kill, it's the people. But there does seem to be a connection, isn't there?
Well, you mentioned the pandemic, but look what happened during the pandemic with this Antifa thing and these crazy people out doing all kinds of crazy things. Look at the drug problems we have. And of course you're going to have higher crime rate when people get arrested, they let them right out of jail, or now you just see them, they don't even get arrested because the prosecutors don't do anything. So you have to have laws to protect.
But no. That couldn't have been it. It has to be just the increase in gun sales. I don't think so. In fact, let's look at a stat from the CDC and let's see if they're being honest in their statistics. They're comparing the United States to other modern nations. And what data do they use for the United States? 2020 data. 2020 data that was the largest increase in homicide rate since 1905, right? And then what year did they use for every other country? 2019 data before the pandemic. It's pretty disingenuous, right? To use, because we had the 2019 data for the US, and so obviously you would compare like and like. No. We'll use 2020 for the US, 2019 for every other country. That's absurd, right? When they have to twist the stat in order to prove their point is probably not right, or else they would just give the stat in an honest way. And if we care about lives, how about the fact that overdose deaths are double that number in the United States? Why aren't we talking about drug laws and securing our border? Look, it's okay to me if you just want to live your life, be a gun owner, go hunting, and not get into the Second Amendment and watch every video on YouTube, every tiny little bit of news that comes out about the Second Amendment. That's fine. But if you're a gun owner, I do think it's important to understand a few of these basic arguments against gun ownership, because again, the real fight for gun rights in the US is not with the anti-gunners. We're never going to convince them. But our own community often does not understand the issues and are passing out our own rights to others, like President Trump did when he was in office.
Take the guns first, go through due process second. I directed Attorney General to clarify whether certain bump stock devices are illegal under current law.
His record on the Second Amendment was terrible. He was terrible on the Second Amendment in office. 15 Republican senators just voted for increased gun control just this last summer. We see voters voting away their own rights constantly throughout the US. And so it is important for us gun owners to understand the issues. Look, in the end, I'm a father, I have kids, and I want my career to be something that I actually care about. If I thought that my kids were in danger by having guns in my house, I would not have them. But the truth is, the bad guys have guns. There are 400 million guns in the United States. If we could just make gun laws and that would stop this from happening, well, then there would be no gun deaths in Mexico because they basically don't allow guns in Mexico. Oh, whoops, yeah, except there are a lot of gun deaths in Mexico, right? The bad guys get guns. And so if the bad guys already have guns, I would like to have them in my home to protect my family against somebody who tries to come in. Now, there are things in this that I think are important too, though. Accidental gun deaths need to be zero. They need to be absolutely zero, especially among kids. Keep your kids safe and understand some of these issues about the Second Amendment.
I think you need education with guns, just like I had. When I was 8 years old, I took hunter education at school. So, and I've always grown up with guns in the house. They're always locked up. I was taught gun safety and the handling of guns and the respect of guns. And I think that's what we need to have is education is the biggest thing.
Go back to God. Put God in your lives. Pretty simple.